Sargon Sada.
Yes.
Yes.
Lina Oshana.
Okay, we're on our way to Washington, D.C., a group of us independent Assyrians. We're going out there to let the U.S. government know that there is an independent, legitimate Assyrian political movement out there that is not being respected, that is not being honored, and that the funding has been cut off to any independent militias. So we are going out there to let the U.S. government know to respect the independently, legitimately elected Assyrian political organizations in Iraq, like the NPU and the Assyrian Democratic Movement. So we're going out there to let the congressmen know, to let the people know that the Nineveh Plains, the people of the Nineveh Plains have a right to self-determination. And under Article 125, the Assyrians of the Nineveh Plains have the right to that land. We're going there to also protest what happened in Nala a couple weeks ago, where the Kurdish, the KRG, is deliberately trying to stop any kind of political rallying cries, any type of protest that the Assyrian people have trying to done. Any time there's a legitimate protest against the KRG have been the oppressors. The KRG are not as moderate as people think they are, and we are going to expose them for who they really are until they keep with the Western way of democracy. Not to shut our people down, not to shut up our independent organizations and set up other puppet organizations to voice their opinions, but the people of Iraq have spoken, and the true movement, everybody knows who the true organization in Iraq is, and the Nineveh Plains that KRG needs to have its hands off the Nineveh Plains and leave and not infiltrate into Assyrian politics. Thank you.
أنا والمارتن يمارن بترخشة واشنطن دي سي الأرخة وخدية اتلانخا ميني فان مليتا الله يمي كله خمخا شوب نيشة ديان كمت من شارتها نيشة نيوهار الله يمي قد أعطيت قد هاوي our future diyan to help us move forward مختمني, and that's the goal. It's always about the youth. But azar قد ملبخلو مودي لأرخت تنايوتا روخت تنايوتا إيكلا راب من بريخ مجوجاليوتا بيتخ بناطرة عمر رابا سورة لتلان يا سورة يا ولد شقلتها من بناهم تنتاما إنا حكم من تخيشنا تينا اتلان يا ولد شقلتها ويطخ أخوبت إيكلا خاشق تاما قد أخنا هوا قال الدية قد هيرخلو مرمي لقالة قد إتقن زدقن تاما ناشاية لا تلقي. So bottom line is that we're going to Washington D.C. to advocate on behalf of our brothers and sisters our hope and for their future, because they are there protecting our land, defending our land from all the enemies, foreign and domestic. And our goal is to help them make sure that there is an Assyria one day. And that will start by making sure our lands of our forefathers are not given up to our ancestors, given up to our enemies. And so, and Nakhraya, because the last thing we need is foreigners and others like the Kurds or Arabs, be it Shia, be it Sunni, that have taken our lands. We're the ancestral people of that land. That is our land, and we're not going to give it up without a fight. And that fight is not just political, it is also by making sure that we tell them we have a voice, we have people there. Our people are all over the world, and if we had a place that we can get them back to, they would be more than happy to go and recreate a Assyria and build it. So Ninos Aho would say Assyria is rising in 2050, and I believe Assyria is rising. And I thank all the youth and the young people who are following us, and this is a start. It's Assyrian Day on the Hill, because we are going to Hill to advocate, and the future looks bright, and I'm happy to be a part of it and to help lead.
I just want to let everyone know that in this van, I'm extremely proud of all of you. You guys are on your way to Washington. You are really representing the Assyrians who are voiceless. We are going to go there. We're going to be loud. We're going to be proud. We're going to let the United States government know what is happening in our country, what is happening to our people, the oppression that is happening by the KRG, the Kurdistan Regional Government. Unfortunately, because of their oppression, they are not allowed to express the things that we are allowed to express here. So, like I said, I'm very proud of you guys. You guys are really, you know, the starting of this movement. And I hope, you know, our next trip, there's going to be 30 plus of you guys. So it's up to you guys to really spread the word and let the nation know, this nation, what's happening to our nation. So I thank you guys. Good job and God bless.
شميل رامي وقرتي إلى كل ابني أمتن أكت هاوي بخايق وداها دنيا وكل تاول كلي شو هارا بداية مش ضروثة بزالة واشنطن دي سي الحكومة المركزية لخا كليت الديان إلى كليت ابني أمتن قو أطرا إلى كليت قانا قانا ليلة خكليت خاخينها وقيومة قاتن خنخرايا إن هاوي لنيشة بيشة إن نيشة ديان إلى خنيشة زديقة خنيشة طاوة قمداها شلطانة قمداها حكمة أبي بسيمة كلت إنا أمان أبي بسيمة كل شوتوكنا جوداها شولا أو شولا نيش دية إلى قخش واشنطن أختمري كليت كان قجعنا كليتن إلى درقولة دو عائلات كلي درقولة بمدخل زودة إما شنة بدراين بولاخك وبني أمتان وهلم هرب داين دانا زطونا أرآت زطونا زدقا أمتنايق وأرآت جانا أخني وخ أصلاي جوداين أرآ وعني باي مبصري من هاخوياتها إن مغزيخلون أي أمتان كمان من يانو هاو باصورة إنا مسيتو بوش بزيادة لا إيه كتهاوخ ساب إتلان عليما إنا شوتو بأمانت إنا أمي كلون هر عين خبة هر عين دوختة تخمنتا قداها أمتان إلى سرقاد ديو إلى زودة من إشتاء ألبا شومو إشتاء شنة أوكي دي كليتا بدوة تشعيت إتلان رابا مسيت إتلان وعاوي بسيمة كلت إنا أمان بس باقور من نوخن إيه كتهاويتون بخايا إن خزيتون عليما يويتون جرأة يويتون نسيهته أوكي وبريشايت هرب داين دانجو شيكاغو إنا أمان شضري عليما دية بنونو وبنات دية أمان شو تبي قداها شولا وازخ لقاء مخا أمتا مخيتا وأبيتون بسيمة رأى
Molay me davule, gami gumullon ravule. Molay me davule, gami gumullon ravule. Hashuri lasbahteni, rudun sharach geni. Hashuri lasbahteni, rudun sharach geni. الشخورة أمي تخلد المخ أم دمي ما تاخذ باقوت تأمي بربر تتأتت يمي واشم بلاشي توتا لترك لي تصدوتا واشم بلاشي توتا لترك لي تصدوتا طبخ لكل الموتى حتخمش خيوتا طبخ لكل الموتى
حالة دياقة ما تخلو عطورايا هلا لا سنة عطورايا هلا they have the roots ancestral home at the end Christians
Don't just say Christians.
Assyrian Christians
Or Middle Eastern.
or Middle East, you know what I mean?
It's all the race. It's all
we
the-
have that pamphlet, so
You
that's
gotta
a
be
specific
specific as like crack.
one. Offices, you're gonna all wear those shirts and go in there and say we're the Assyrian American community, and Tiachlacha, we're here to represent our people. We're from Chicago. You can say what district you are, right? But we're here.
عاشوري لصبحتني رقودني شرق أخياني خيم والله مقدمولي قامي قملون رابولي عاشوري لصبحتني رقودني شرق أخياني قود شرق صروف مرة خرر لي أخياني قود شرق توخ مرة أربس نقش منيني لاشم بلاجي بيتوتا لترق بالي تصدوتا طبخ لكل النوتا خيم علي مقبولي قامي قملون رابولي خيم علي مقبولي قامي قملون رابولي عاشوري لصبحتني رقودني شراخي جيني عاشوري لصبحتني رقودني شراخي جيني
Organizations and European organizations around the world, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be starting the conference, the briefing. Mr. Michael Uesh of the Iraqi Sustainable Democracy Project, former Iraqi Sustainable Democracy Project, Juliana Tamarazi, and Mr. Dr. El Marabo will be presenting. And I'm just going to get to it because we have another meeting with Senator Kirk right after here. So Michael's going to be first up, and then we're going to have to head out to get to the next meeting, and then Elmer and Juliana will proceed. Michael?
Thanks very much, Martin. Thank you to everyone being here. And by that I mean those who are interested in helping the Assyrian community in their homeland, and the Assyrians who are here helping themselves to help our nation to get things done. Welcome to DC in terms of it's controlled chaos, and we're literally out the door to meet a senator last minute who wants to discuss some serious issues. So what I'm going to do right now, and Dr. Al Marabo and Juliana Timurazi, two fantastic activists in our community, are going to be able to carry the conversation with you in terms of the voice of grassroots Assyrians finally reaching Washington, D.C. This event is happening because a voice for our people, its concerns, its interests, representing what are the demands coming from our homeland, are obviously not in Washington, D.C. They're not reaching Washington, D.C., and we see that with the problems that they're having forming legislation that will help. And it's an amazing achievement of the Assyrian American community. We were just hearing from a congressional staffer that they've never seen something like this. The coordination of so many Shorta Assyrian American organizations, local, state, regional, and national, bringing a concerted message in a systematic way to Washington. It is controlled chaos, and I am out the door for a meeting, but I do want to just hammer the critical narrative that is missing here. Before I do that, let me just say, I am a registered foreign agent with the Neighborhood Plains Protection Units at the Department of Justice, but I play a supportive advisory and policy expert capacity with Assyrian American organizations throughout the United States, and that's the role that I'm serving here. It is their message. It's not my message. It's their message. And the gap that they're filling in the policy discussion today is the following. They're so grateful for genocide recognition. It was absolutely essential, and we applaud everyone who worked on it and drove it forward. But there were flaws in it. There were serious flaws in it. Praise of the Kurdistan Regional Government, which actually disarmed systematically the people of the Nineveh Plains 2 weeks before ISIS attack, abandoning the people of the Nineveh Plains without warning so that they might fall prey to ISIS before ISIS attack, are part of the problems that are reflected in the genocide recognition resolution. And the concern is those flaws will seep into the safe haven resolution or any safe haven policy. So they're here to add a corrective to that. Very short and sweet. The Kurdistan Regional Government was here asking for hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas in the Kurdistan Regional Government, in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, Assyrians are not even allowed to protest land theft. Freedom of assembly denied. Freedom of speech denied. On an ethnic and sectarian basis. In addition to that, our spokesperson, when I say our spokesperson, Dr. Munayaku represents Shevet, Yazidi, Turkmen, Assyrian citizens, non-Kurdish minorities on the Constitution Drafting Committee. She had to walk off in protest because our demands are summarily being dismissed. And yet the Kurdistan Regional Government has the audacity to be here and demand support for their fight against ISIS from Americans without any accountability. So this delegation, all of you here, and to those who are supporters, is here to deliver their narrative, their truth, because their truth is missing in Washington, D.C. I thank you very much, and I know this is the start of something amazing. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Michael. One last thing, I'd like to thank the youth and all the young people that drove 14 hours to be here today. Assyrian Day on the Hill is a big thing, and we're going to start it. And then Assyrian National Council of Illinois, Mr. Shiba Mandu, Mafono Sabri Atman, Nino Starnian, A&B, Assyrian National Broadcasting, and everybody else. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome Ms. Juliana Tamarazi of Iraqi Christian Relief Council and Philos Project. Thank you.
Shalom Aleichem. For those of you who don't know what this means, it means peace be upon you, our way of greeting. It is an honor to be here on this sacred land, and I'd like to also thank all of you distinguished guests that you came and you're advocating in our youth. You know, at 3 in the morning, as I was crawling in bed, finally, because they screwed up my hotel schedule, I was thinking of you guys. I said, I have no room to complain. I am going to sleep at least for 2-3 hours, and these guys are on the bus. So humbly thank you. And our guests from Europe, thank you for being here. Our American friends, we are grateful that you have taken the time to come here to really listen to what we have to say and advocate on our behalf, Lord willing. Juliana Tamarazi, I'm with the Iraqi Christian Relief Council. That's an aid organization. We've been serving the people, the Assyrian people, for the last 9 years. I also represent the Philos Project, an organization that advocates for positive Christian engagement in matters of the Middle East. And tomorrow, for those of you who have not received an invitation to the Safe Haven Roundtable, please please give me your email addresses. We're going to send you an invitation. This is where there will be an opportunity for you to meet the people that are participating in this roundtable and really to have an opportunity to speak and let the Americans hear what we have to say and vice versa. So why are we here today? Many of you have the documentation that was passed out. We're here because our plight is not 2 years old. Our plight really technically began 4 centuries before Christ. This is when Nineveh fell. Fast forward through all the genocides we've been through, we believe as the Assyrian people, this is the most, I don't want to say our final time, although many of us feel that way. This is the opportune time to let the world know what is it that we're looking for. And we started, for those of you who do not know, we started with 1.5 million Assyrians, also known as Chaldeans and Syriacs in Iraq. Today we have 200,000 left. A lot of those people left with broken hearts, not because they wanted to leave. And many of them are waiting for the opportunity to return. So this is what we're here for, to recreate a homeland. We may call it a safe haven, we may call it a province, but truly it is a homeland, not only for the Assyrian Christians, but also for the Turkmen and the Yazidis that are suffering from the same fate that we're grappling with. Many of you may have heard, especially our American friends, that the Assyrians and minorities are, just vulnerable, defenseless individuals who really need to be taken care of, and basically looking at us as victims. We are victims. However, we're a resilient nation that through all the persecution, as we have moved in groups of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people, we have taken care of ourselves. Yes, we're looking for help from the West, but we are not victims in the terms of, yes, we're going to live as victims forever. Because there are groups of people in the world, I'm not going to mention nations, that are okay living as victims. We're not. We have doctors, we have lawyers, we have farmers who want to go back and rebuild their homeland. We want to partake in governing themselves. So to my American friends and to my youth that are representing here today, we are that strong, resilient nation. And it is time for the world really to listen to us and hear us. My American friends that are here, we look to you for connections. We look to you to cultivate that environment for us to be able to go in and educate those who do not know what our plight is and give them tools to come along our side. Many times, and this is for my fellow Assyrians, how many times have we come to Washington and we have spoken on this issue to members of the House and Senate and the State Department? But how many times have we really said, what is it that you need from us? How can we support you? Help us. So we have to start thinking along those terms, that we have documentation that we can provide these people with. We cannot just come and say, this is what we want, and walk away and not come back 6 months for another 6 months. We have to have a presence here. And we have to come with documentation. And God knows, there's a lot of that out there that we can bring with us. For my American friends here, and I keep on saying that, so if you guys are getting annoyed, forgive me. We are the megaphone for those people that are living on the ground. A lot of Americans that go to Iraq, they come back and they say, who are you in the diaspora that you're speaking on those people's behalf? And our message is, those people that we're speaking on their behalf, they're living under fire. So they cannot entirely be truthful to you. They don't know you. They cannot trust you fully. So they are asking us in the West who have freedom of speech to deliver their message. So that is an important thing for the Americans to really understand. That although we live in the diaspora, many of us were forced out of our homes. Many of us came because we didn't have a choice. And if choice is given, we will go back. And something that for me, as an activist for so long, it really gives such joy to my heart to see such fervors in your eyes, our young people. That fire that is living within you gives us, the rest of us, just courage, that push that we need to go further. Because it's a long road ahead, and sometimes we get tired. But you guys driving all those hours, coming here, gives us tells us that reason why we're standing here, and tells the other activists that are a little bit older than even we are, it shows that they've paved the path for you guys. So they have set the example for the young people to come through and deliver this. So I don't know how much time we have, Kelsey. How much time do we have here today?
We have until 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I want this to be a dialogue, Elmer, and I'm going to ask you to step up as well.
Sure.
So I basically, what I'm going to do is what I have tried to do, and what I'm going to do is paint a human picture on our suffering. These people have lost everything. They're professionals and have lost everything, but they're willing to live through the hardship for a bigger cause, which is recreation of a homeland. And Elmer is going to go more from a legislation perspective, what this whole thing is going to look like. But let's not just look at it black and white, that let's get them out of there. Because a lot of them don't want to leave. Or let's just belong to the KRG, the Kurdish Regional Government. There are other options. And those people are asking for other options. And that viable option for us to be linked to the Iraqi government. Now, it's up to us to provide the American government now, why do we want? And it was brought up today at the State Department. Why is it that you want to belong to the Iraqi government and not the KRG? So we need to provide that viable information to these individuals. But again, Elmer, I don't know if you would agree or not, but I'd like this to be a dialogue. Feel free after we're done, feel free to ask questions, because this is the time to ask those important questions. Again, if you guys don't have that invitation to the roundtable, please stop by, because tomorrow, believe me, it's going to be a vibrant discussion at the Hyatt Place. Thank you guys. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America and allowing us to live.
Thank you, Juliana, and thank you everyone for attending. So this is a very difficult time for Assyrians and survival of Assyrians, and it's a critical juncture in our history. And the way that we move forward is essential in terms of thinking about it strategically. That said, I'm coming to you now in a sort of a new role. I've been involved in a variety of Assyrian activities in the past, but now I'm the president of a new organization called the Nineveh Plain Defense Fund. I'm the president. Vice president is Susan Yonan, who's here. Michael Uash is the secretary. That organization is registered as an agent. I'm an American citizen, is registered as an agent for foreign principles being the Nineveh Plain Protection Units and the Assyrian Democratic Movement. The Nineveh Plain Protection Units represents Assyrians essentially taking control of their own destiny to essentially create local security forces within the Nineveh Plain, frankly, to defend their homeland and protect themselves. That is going to be a critical step forward in terms of how we move forward. And in terms of our approach in talking to policymakers here in the US is to recognize this narrative that essentially our survival in Iraq, in the Nineveh Plain in particular, which is clearly our sort of central ancestral homeland, is utterly dependent on our ability to provide security for ourselves. Because frankly, we have not been provided security from people who pledged that they would provide security, whether it be the Iraqi government or whether it be the Kurdistan Regional Government. And as Michael was saying, there is clear evidence that the Kurdish Peshmerga not only abandoned us prior to the invasion of the Nineveh Plain, but actively disarmed our people 2 weeks prior. That's obviously a huge concern, and it's created a tremendous amount of distrust for our people in terms of relying on other actors to provide that security. And so if Assyrians are going to survive in the Nineveh Plain, and we feel that that's essential, it's essential for our survival as a people culturally, because as we go into diaspora, yes, we might be able to survive as a people genetically, but it's much harder to maintain our culture separated from our historic roots. And so survival within our homeland is a key goal, and it's something that we are actively focused in on. And in terms of our ability to survive there, like I said, it's going to require local security, but it needs to be within a structure that's both legal and within the larger structures, appropriate legal structures of Iraq. Well, because of the history of, frankly, persecution that we've suffered, not just, obviously there's been religious persecution, and I think that the persecution that we suffered from the Islamic State is very apparent. But what's less apparent, and certainly less apparent to I think a lot of people in the West, is that Assyrians and minorities have not been treated as fairly by the Kurdistan regional government. There's been a history of land theft and other disenfranchisement in voting and other situations that have led Assyrians not to feel as comfortable and safe within the Kurdistan region, at least from an equal status as citizens. Yes, they don't feel physically threatened, but they don't feel that they have equal rights, and they don't feel that they are treated as first-class citizens. That is, it's because of that situation that we are looking for a separate area within the governmental structure of Iraq that we could be equally, that we could have representation in a meaningful way for our numbers, such that we can garner resources from the central government and have our own sort of schools, our own economic development efforts to help grow and develop our community. The only and obvious place that could be is within the Nineveh Plain. And so what we're seeking is essentially a safe haven that would lead to a province within the Nineveh Plain once the sort of period of hostilities is over. However, our concern is, and it's the reason that we're here on Capitol Hill now, is to bring it to the attention that we are very concerned because, frankly, statements have been clearly made by the Kurdish regional government. President Barzani made it clear that after the liberation of Sinjar, the Yazidi area, that from his perspective, Sinjar was now part of Kurdistan. And Peshmerga generals have also stated that any areas that they liberate will be considered part of Kurdistan. We reject that. The Nineveh Plain has not been part of the Kurdish regional area of Iraq. It has been disputed. We are seeking that that area remain separate from the Kurdish regional government, and that that area be tied to the central government as a province. And then by having a separate provincial structure, long term, we feel that we could then have our own local security, and then again constitute efforts to develop our communities locally within the plain and frankly rebuild our community. This is the only path forward that we see as viable to survive in Iraq. And so we are seeking support, and frankly here too, as Juliana said, provide information for why we're saying what we're saying, because we don't feel that our message has been understood. It's clearly the case that I think people in the West recognize now the genocide that Assyrians are suffering at the hands of the Islamic State, but it shouldn't be the case that essentially other actors such as the Kurdish regional government should exploit a genocide to essentially expand and annex land that's not historically theirs, and then exert control over other people. So that's the other message we're here to send, and it's an important message, and we certainly come with information to essentially justify our concerns. So with that said, I'd like to open it up for questions, and I don't know if Juliana's still here, she might feel some questions too. There she is. Feel free.
Should we just open it up to everybody?
Yeah.
So, are there any questions in the room in terms of what was accomplished today, this morning, or what the plan is for tomorrow? What does Nineveh Plain mean? Where is it located?
Pete, you had a question.
So I'm wondering on something that's more of a 30,000 foot view.
Sure.
Long-term sustainability of your objective and what you're seeking. What do you have that is not reliant on international security or Kurdish security in the region? What is part of your plan that security is sustainable within?
So clearly, in terms of the military operations that are going to need to be conducted to liberate the Nineveh Plain and frankly Nineveh generally, we recognize that the situation is complicated and that the idea that there's going to be international peacekeeping forces coming in and having a large footprint of international soldiers is not realistic, and frankly that's not what we're asking. I mean, to the extent that the United States has been involved in supportive ways, and yes, they do have some limited military on the ground, but not in a direct combat role. What we're seeking is leveraging local security that's based in the Nineveh Plain under the essentially national security structure of the government of Iraq, and having a prominent role within the liberation of Nineveh by local security in the immediate liberation operation and then long term, to the extent that yes, there will be some participation from Kurdish Peshmerga and the Iraqi army, and obviously the Iraqi army, frankly, we imagine would play sort of a leading role. But our concern, as I talked about earlier in terms of the geopolitics of what's going on, is that we're concerned that the Kurdish Peshmerga will essentially participate in the liberation of Nineveh in a forceful way, and then essentially stay there and remain as a pretext to annexation. And that is what we are concerned about, and that's what we're bringing to the attention of policymakers. And what we're basically saying is that Nineveh Plain area has been disputed territory since the Iraq War, and we've been advocating for that area to be a separate area in terms of a provincial structure now for years. Our concern is that that political resolution of the disputed land get preempted by essentially the Kurdish Peshmerga coming and claiming it as their own. And what we're asking for is that their role be limited in that political resolution, be the way that the land gets decided jurisdictionally through a political process diplomatically within the government of Iraq. And that to the extent that the United States is involved in this process, even in a supportive role, we ask that the United States communicate clearly to the Kurdistan regional government that that land is disputed and it should be resolved within the political situation within Iraq once the land is liberated. So that's what we're recognizing and asking for. We think that long term, we can provide that local security in that area. We do have plenty of volunteers that are frankly willing to serve in that supporting police role. And the resources could certainly be brought to bear to develop the natural talent and assets that are there.
I think a prominent example would be the recent land encroachment or encroachment on our lands in Nala. Why we are afraid or why we don't want to really be, because there was no protection of that area. In that small area, if the Kurds were going to encroach and take that land away, where was the Peshmerga, where was the government to stop it? That's number one. Number two, the recent ISIS attacks, and the media did not really get the real story. It was the Assyrians who actually stepped up and fought and pushed back ISIS. There were a lot of Kurdish Peshmerga that died, in fact, and unfortunately one of our own American boys was a casualty as well. But it was our men with very little weaponry that they have, they fought back. And in fact, when they ran out of ammunition, people from towns off Al-Qush and other surrounding villages, they came in, they gave their own small weapons that they had to join the fight and go fight to push back ISIS. So the reason I'm saying that is because the will is there. And if the American government or the Iraqi government really takes that seriously and they provide adequate support, there are many, even our young men and women in the diaspora, that want to go. They don't want to die. But if there's adequate training and there is weapons that are provided, there are a lot of people that want to go back and fight and protect our land. So if there are any resources that you know or anybody knows that could participate and help us from a military standpoint, I think there are groups that would welcome that.
Let me make one other point. We do emphasize locally based security, and as primarily, obviously, local meaning from the Nineveh Plain area, prominent role. Clearly there's going to be support and role by the larger Iraqi national security structure, and that's really going to be ultimately the primary boots on the ground. That said, especially after the liberation is completed, to the extent that there's international involvement, we are not looking for international peacekeeping forces per se. What we're looking for is limited international military observers to participate and be on the ground to essentially allow again this idea of a political process to play itself out. And just to make sure that there's time and space so that essentially the jurisdiction of the Nineveh Plain can be arbitrated fairly and with due process.
Sorry, I know what I'm asking.
Sure.
But I'm curious, as a follow-up to what you just mentioned, the lands that you're talking about in the safe haven, are these historically tied, or is it just in the region what would be feasible versus what's historically tied?
No. When you think about, the Nineveh Plain, this is the land that's essentially south of the mountains of the north. It's in this valley, and east of Mosul. Mosul, the way to think of Mosul is essentially the modern city that sprung from the ruins of ancient Nineveh, right? The ruins of ancient Nineveh are on the banks of the Tigris River there, right on the outskirts of Mosul. Nineveh was the last ancient Assyrian Empire's capital city. And so essentially, the Assyrian people survived in those lands from those times, even though, yes, there have been waves of a variety of foreign, peoples coming into that land and stuff. And we've lived as a minority within those lands. Now that said, the Nineveh Plain is a multi-ethnic area within northern Iraq. There are Yazidis, there are Shabaks, there are Mandeans, there are Turkmen. There are Kurds, not many, but some. There are Shiites and there are Sunni Arabs. So it is one of the very unique multicultural areas within Iraq. And that's all more reason that if it separates out as its own area, the Assyrians themselves would only be a plurality within that area. But our optimism is that within that structure, we could at least have fair representation within that provincial government, whereas now, as locked in with the larger Nineveh province, which historically has been managed by mostly Sunni with some Kurdish representation in Mosul, we have been unable to garner resources directed towards our villages and homes in the Nineveh Plain. But there's continuity for centuries and millennia in that land. We are not talking about carving it out because it's just land that no one wanted. This is the land that we've always lived in.
Yeah, and in fact, historically, there's never been Kurds that have lived, so they cannot claim it as their ancestral homeland. Historically, it's been an Assyrian land. The Yazidis have lived there. So this whole notion that if we liberate it, then it's ours, that needs to be taught to the Europeans, to the Westerners, really. That a lot of people think the Kurds live there as well. But historically, there weren't any. There are many, many villages that there's not one Kurd that has ever lived there. And in fact, in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken, I have scholars in the room as well, I was told by people on the ground in Iraq that Saddam Hussein actually called it Ashur, that entire region. And even schools that he had opened, they called them Ashur. he called it offshore, but through the Ba'athist, the rise of the Ba'athism, he then, of course, went after us as an ethnic group. And aside from that, I lost my point, what I was going to say, but the point is that the Kurds really don't have any claim on the Nineveh plain. That's our ancestral homeland.
If there would have been no more than 90 years that
Yes. Yes.
Looking back in the last 100 years, after the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire, the last Islamic state, we had a very strong militia force throughout World War I and World War II. And when the British and the French came into Iraq, they saw that the most trustworthy people, the most shared values people of the region with Western democracy were the Assyrians. That's why the British Air Force started the Assyrian levies, which was comprised of 70 to 80% of Assyrians, because we were trustworthy and we had those Western democracy shared values. If we do get this kind of funding, and as you know, in World War I, World War II, those militias, those Assyrian militias, which both of my grandfathers were in World War II, that fought against the Nazis and the Italians at the time, they were very successful in defeating, with the limited manpower and resources we had, but we were very successful. If we do get the funding for the NPU, how can we not make the same mistakes we did in World War I and World War II, where our militias were completely dismantled, where these successful movements were broken up by Kurdish, outside Kurdish influences and Arab influences? How can we prevent that this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Mira. The history of the last 10 years has certainly brought us to a sort of, frankly, existential and desperate point. And we are fighting our last best chance to sort of carve something for ourselves to stay in our historical homeland. The idea that we need to look to ourselves is something that I think that Assyrians have to come more and more to terms with. And I think for the last 10 years, myself included, we've been going to world powers and frankly begging. And that's not to say that we're not going to continue to talk with people with influence and means and resources, but frankly, I think their willingness to help us is dependent on our willingness to help ourselves. And my organization, the Nineveh Plain Defense Fund, is built on this principle that first and foremost, we're going to rely on ourselves to start protecting ourselves and defending ourselves. Every human has the right for self-defense, and that's all we're doing. We're just claiming our right to self-defense. So we are going to create, and we have created, local security forces. We have worked with the government of Iraq to officially become part of the national security structure of the government of Iraq. We're part of the official Nineveh Liberation Operation Command. So we're not acting extra legally, but we are relying on ourselves. We certainly will be looking to the community, the Assyrian community, and frankly others internationally who want to help us. And first and foremost, that is how we're going to move forward. That said, I am hopeful and optimistic that if we assert our own right to stay definitively, that others will see how passionate we are and dedicated to our own cause. And they'll also see the strategic value in partnering with us, and hopefully we will garner assistance, whether it be from private citizens or whether it be from the United States or whether it be from other international bodies. We certainly are looking for that support, but if it doesn't come, we're moving forward.
That's a very good question. I think to add what Elmer just said, I think by us as a nation cultivating
young people into great diplomats, great strategic thinkers, great generals, members of Congress or Parliament. I think as we cultivate within our nation, because we have, God knows, we have a handful of you guys that have come, and I see potential in every one of you. They could be one day a great diplomat. And I think for us to train ourselves and learn from other nations how they've done it. Israel started really from nothing. The United States became this beacon of light because of religious persecution. So I think I look to our young people to become those strategic thinkers that really can position our nation on a worldwide platform as a strategic value, because there was actually a member of Congress who is a friend of ours, and he was not meaning this maliciously. He said, Juliana, your people are dispensable people. You don't have any strategic value for the United States or Europe or Australia to stand for you. Give us the reason why we should fight for you. The Kurds are large in numbers. The Kurds are supposedly brave. At least they've shown that to us. And they are more united than you are, which I think we've already rectified that whole unity business. Thank God. That's a big step that we've taken forward. That's the good news. That now we come in as a united front, right? So we, as a nation, it is imperative for us to think about what he said. How can we become strategically of value for a country like the United States to want to stand up for us? It's beyond moral discussion. It's beyond that. We've done that for a long time. Morally, the United States, you came in 2003 and things broke, fix it. Or Great Britain betrayed us in early 1900s. It doesn't work. Politically, we have to come across as strategically important in the region. And I think we can play a vital role by uniting with other minorities and showing that we are the stability agent, we're the stable agent in the Middle East. Because Christianity, just in general, has been the bridge of understanding between the Islamic East and the Christian West. And we, as gifted Assyrians, can really build on that as well.
I want to echo and add to that a little bit in terms of the strategic value. Certainly it's the case that if Iraq is to stay together, that we play this strategic role if there was an infiltrating province helping to buffer essentially conflicts between the Kurdistan region, the Sunni region, and the Shia region in the south. And so we think that we can play this important role. This is a point that we've made, frankly, for 10 years, but I think now, in light of the Islamic State and the sort of concern around Iraq fracturing, I think it's much more apparent that this strategic role is truly there, and it is an opportunity that I think that we offer and bring to the table. Certainly it's the case that if the Kurdistan region of Iraq were to subsume the Nuba Plain, you would imagine that that's just one more step closer towards independence for the Kurdistan region. It's certainly been the policy of the United States to support the integrity of the state of Iraq, to maintain it as a country, and it's certainly the case that we're supportive of that policy, and we see a role for ourselves within that larger structure.
The one I wanted to ask is, we keep hearing in the West and from politicians that the Kurds are this moderate Islamic democracy. I don't think, first of all, I don't believe in such thing as Islamic democracy, but those of us that have been to Iraq in 2009, 2010, I don't know, you've went, we keep hearing how the Kurds are this moderate force in the Middle East. And we have documented footage that the Kurds are not as moderate as we think they are. In 2011, there was looting and burning of Assyrian stores and businesses in Zaho, which is a northern city in Iraq. In 2014 or 13, they were tearing down a Christmas tree. And this is not just 10, 15 men. This is hundreds, maybe thousands of young men in the streets. Where were this moderate Kurdish Peshmerga during this? No arrests were made. taking over our antiquities in Erbil, we had 3,000-year-old Assyrian ruins, which they have named Kurdistan, Kurdish history. How can we call these people moderate when they're rewriting history and allowing their citizens to commit? So how has the West been fooled into believing the story of Kurdish moderates? And there are many Kurdish people that are moderate and want true democracy, secular government, but there's been a lot of documented things. So I'm just asking, why has the West not noticed this?
Because their PR machine is very strong. Because their lobbying machine is very strong here. They're very rich, and they spend a lot of money, and they come in, they really woo the American government. They're kind, they provide great amenities, when they take delegations to Iraq, they roll the red carpet with them, right? And here we are, coming in, kicking and screaming, why are you not paying attention to us? So I think there has to be a shift in our approach, first of all. Second of all, one of the members of the State Department told us 2 months ago, right before genocide was declared by Secretary Kerry, he said, the Yazidis, as the attacks happened, the Yazidis were calling the State Department in the middle of the night from Iraq saying, this family, by this name, these are the girls that were kidnapped, these are the girls' names. Are the girls' names real? We don't know. But they were in constant contact with the State Department. They have repeatedly brought so many documentation. So today, in fact, in the State Department said they came in more organized than you did, even though we've been at this for so long. So I think and I'm being self-critical, being an Assyrian myself, that we need to be more organized and our PR machine needs to be stronger. There's a fantastic book, and I unfortunately didn't bring it with me, but it's by Fred Ekman, that lists you've seen it, all the atrocities by name of the individual, the story, and the location. So why are we not bringing that, and myself included, I feel to bring it with me today, why are we not bringing that and giving it to members of House and Senate in the state? So I think we just have to have more presence in DC, a more organized presence. I think we have to have more eloquent documentation of what has happened to us. And I think we need to spend money on, frankly, reaching to the media, bringing people to write articles about this, and sponsoring maybe people to go to Iraq and see. For example, when I was in Iraq just 2 months ago, I had Rabban Hormuz, the monastery, I had brought some holy water from there, so I unfortunately forgot it in my carry-on. So they took it away from me. As the guy was taking it away from me, the woman was taking it away from me at the airport, I said, hold on. So I ran from it and I did the cross, and the secular Kurd came, the guy, snatched it out of my hand and threw it with such vengeance in the garbage can. There's not one Christian, I'm not going to say Assyrian, there's not one Christian judge throughout Kurdistan anywhere. In our schools, in our Assyrian schools, the history that is taught, Simple, who is a murderer, who killed our patriarch, is hailed as a brave man, as a brave leader. And that is being taught to our kids. And our kids say, look, ISIS killed us suddenly. These guys are killing us slowly. And that's why we say to our non-Assyrian friends, we are the megaphone for those individuals who are afraid to talk. But the other thing is, very important to understand that we are looked upon as Christians. And some of it is our own fault. We don't stop. My own organization, Iraqi Christian Relief Council, the reason we called it Iraqi Christian is because, and I always say this, is because people didn't know who the Assyrians were, especially 9 years ago. So we strategically chose the name Iraqi Christian, and as Susan was in that room, and Elmer, when we go in, I was making a presentation about a week ago, I think, when we go into these homes and churches and conferences, we teach who the Assyrians are, but we go with the banner of Iraqi Christian because Americans understand it, okay? Because we're looked upon as Christians, and because Iraqi KRG allows missionaries to go there and evangelize to their own Kurds, and there are Kurds that are becoming Christian, we fail to teach Americans and Westerners that we're Assyrians, and they may not be against Christians, although they tear down the tree and everything, they're against Assyrians. And they're actively ethnically cleansing us.
that's an important distinction that it's up to us to make.
There's a video on YouTube where an ISIS member crosses a bridge
and shakes hand. I don't understand what they're saying to each other in Arabic, but he shakes hands with one of the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters and gives him water, and they're talking. I mean, can you picture America doing that with Nazis or an evil communist country? I mean, this footage should be, it's very, I mean, it's out in the open, and this is what we need to push to the American government, to the West, that Western governments, Western democracy needs to look at the Christians in the Middle East, because we do share values, similar values. Israel especially needs to look at Christians in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and I believe we need to be louder on that issue.
Let me make one other additional point that follows on your question and builds on what Juliana was saying, and that's that to the extent that that information hasn't been brought to bear, it hasn't been brought to bear effectively by our own people. And one of the things that we hope to do, because we've now recognized that we can't be silent, we can't be quiet about the oppression that we are seeing from a sort of geopolitical perspective on the Kurdish side. Clearly, we haven't been quiet on the genocide around the Islamic State, but it's this new information around sort of the persecution that we've suffered in this more sort of slow genocide perspective that we've suffered as second-class citizens that we're fighting against. Now we are bringing it to the table now, but one might ask the question, well, why historically haven't the Syrian people brought it to bear already in the past? And frankly, our people are living in that area. They're surrounded by Kurdish people. Many of our people are within the Kurdish area, and the Kurdish government has, and the Kurdish Democratic Party has operated within a very strict patronage system. And it is the case that unless you sort of pledge allegiance to the KDP, that you're not going to essentially succeed and get ahead within that community. That was frankly the same tactics that the Ba'ath regime used to exert control within Iraq. Our people are in a more desperate situation now, and so many people, and I understand the situation that they're in, they're caught between a rock and a hard place, and they're just trying to survive to the next day. And so they begrudgingly see the oppression, but they may not speak up because they don't feel at liberty and free to. But many of us here, we're American citizens, yet we're connected to our people in Iraq. And certainly to the extent that the American government is involved, and to the extent that the American government is even, recently to the amount of $415 million funding the Kurdish Peshmerga, we want to make it clear to our government that we have grave concerns around the reliability of the Kurdish regional government to secure rights for minorities, and that, frankly, we want to see the Kurdish regional government start to implement procedures and rules that would lead to the protection of minority rights. They still have a draft constitution that they haven't been able to pass, but nowhere in that draft constitution is a Bill of Rights. Nowhere in that constitution is securities for us to remain in Kurdistan freely, and yet the claim is to live within an expanded Kurdistan to include the minimum plain, and yet there's no political rights, there's no guarantees. They say that they'll give us those rights, but they don't put them in writing. That said, frankly, given the history, and then most recently, like I said, Michael referenced, when we can provide evidence of the active disarming and then abandoning of our people prior to, 2 weeks prior to the invasion, which suggests potentially some cooperation with the Islamic State, or at least knowledge of the invasion and exploiting it. We frankly just, even with those political securities, which we still want, we don't trust that they would truly implement them and follow through, which is why we feel that our long-term viability to stay within Iraq is a separate province, such that we're not negotiating with the Kurdish regional government in terms of our political rights, that we are on more equal footing to essentially have a legal system and a judicial system in which we can operate as equal and free citizens within Iraq.
And I'm going to just real quick, how many of you have you heard that Americans say Kurds? They've never said Sunni Muslim Kurds, right? They always say Kurds, so they always look at them as a nationality versus truly they're Sunni Muslim and they can turn on Israel, they can turn on America on heart.
Right. Oh, you ready? Okay. So you brought up a good point earlier about how the West had referred to the Assyrians as people with no potential, that they didn't have enough to offer to the country of Iraq. But my point is, that's directed towards two of you, is Iraq is a land of diversity. Mm-hmm. Diversity, as well as its constitution bears that it's a parliamentary, democratic, federal government. And with that, you need to maintain diversity. As we've seen throughout Iraq, such as areas as Hormatu, which is a primarily Shia Turkmen area, Nineveh Plains, Sinjar, which is a Yazidi area. When you see these minority groups, these indigenous minorities that we're saying, when they leave these areas, you see infighting. You see such as the Peshmerga massacring kids, adults, without difference in those Hormatu. Same thing with Sinjar. And obviously, what you guys are doing is great, and you're trying to disallow that process by happening in the Nineveh Plains. So the question is, how can your humanitarian work, as well as the MPDF that has become the sole representation of the MPU, how can your work disallow that process from happening?
I think what we're doing today, but not let it fizzle away, is extremely important. So this passion, this fervor that you find in your hearts here and even back home, I think it has to be continuously repeated. We have to come back with documentation. I believe, I wish and I hope tomorrow there will be Iraqi ambassadors that will be in the room. Because once we have the Iraqis on our side, the actual Iraqi government on our side, and I wish they were in the room today, we're an ally for Iraq, a natural ally, right? We believe in a democratic country of Iraq. We don't want to secede from Iraq, for example, like the Kurds do. So we are an asset, like you said, to Iraq. So I think we have to find allies, and we have to cultivate those relationships. And so for those non-Assyrians who are in the room, if you have a wide network, and I'm sure you do, every one of you comes in with their own network and connections. If you really feel your heart's moved, first of all, educate others to as much as you can in depth about the situation, and then offer us opportunities to meet with your network so we can come and educate them and hopefully really spread this like a web across the world. Did you want to answer that?
Is there any kind of active effort to recruit some of the displaced and unemployed Assyrians that are in Erbil? There's obviously thousands of men there that would be able-bodied fighters.
Yeah.
Is there any effort right now to actively recruit them into a militia to reclaim some of those lands?
Well, that is what the Nineveh Plain Protection Unit is, in terms of a local security force that's now been authorized under the Iraqi, national security structure, to operate within the Nineveh Plain as a local security force. There are currently several hundred guards that are part of this unit that have been trained. There's a wait list of over 2,000. Easily, the number of people that could be mobilized is probably in the order of 5,000, if not more. Frankly, a force of that size would probably be adequate to provide the security that would be necessary to allow the people that are currently living as displaced refugees in Erbil or Duhok or frankly elsewhere in the Middle East. We have lots of Assyrians that just because they left Iraq doesn't mean they've entirely left the Middle East. They're living in limbo, in Jordan or, somewhere else in the Middle East, in Istanbul, other places. And our hope is that once Iraq stabilizes and ISIS is pushed from Iraq, that the opportunity for resettlement materializes. Resettlement will not occur without local security, and I need to emphasize local security that Syrians can trust. The key feature of the Naval Plain Protection Unit is that all of the individual guards are people that grew up in that area. They're local inhabitants of that area. And so they're known to the locals. And it's with that kind of structure that essentially people can have confidence to say, okay, I'm gonna take the risk to move back home and try to rebuild a life there. I do think that with time, again, once the larger crisis has been stabilized, and if there is this opportunity to bring people back into the Naval Plain, I do think that the larger Syrian diaspora will certainly work to provide some support and help our people resettle. And certainly we'll be looking for assistance from others, whether they be private actors or from the United States and other international bodies to help us resettle that land. We've certainly received signals that there would be interest in doing that kind of humanitarian and economic development work. I do think that is potentially available. Well, the message that we've been trying to communicate is that for us to be successful in creating an environment in which people feel comfortable and can trust requires sort of two key factors. One, which I've emphasized, which is security, and security that you can trust, but then two, a political structure that allows fair and adequate and equal representation. And so that's what's key in terms of having a separate province. It allows that fair representation such that people will know that they have a representative on their local provincial council, that money that would be allocated from the central government of Iraq could fairly go to develop a school or develop the streets or what have you. This particular juncture is critical because the political resolution of how the Naval Plains is going to move into the future is, if it's not shaped now on the front end by how the military operation proceeds, it will happen de facto, and that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to prevent the de facto, frankly, annexation of the Naval Plain into the KRG. And if that were to occur, we feel that we wouldn't have the adequate political rights we need, and that, frankly, the ability for us to create security forces that were our own people would be compromised, particularly in terms of the command and control, and such that in that environment, that would not create the environment that would encourage people to either move back from the Kurdistan region or resettle coming from Amman or Istanbul or what have you.
To add to what you're saying, I think if we had adequate training, if there were resources, I think a lot more people, a lot more than 5,000 would enlist to go fight. That's just simply put. But the reason I'm looking at my phone is there was an interesting question that was brought up last week. What are the parallels, what are the similarities between, that we as Assyrians can draw, between when America aided the Kurds in 1991 and what's happening to us today? So the reason America stepped in to help was because of the genocide that was launched against the Kurds, right, by Saddam Hussein. So now we have that as well, officially recognized by the United States. So that's one of the parallels. And I'm just saying that because I think we should start thinking along those lines, drawing parallels, what drove America to help the Kurds, and how we can appeal to them and show them that now we need your help. For example, so after the genocide, then there was the no-fly zone that was created. And then we've been asking, technically, for a no-fly zone type of an area or a tactic to be used for our people. They told us, this member of the Pentagon said that's really not feasible to have a no-fly zone because the area is so small. So, in fact, they cracked a joke about it. They said they're going to have to take turns. This plane is going to have to take turns because it's so small, and they laughed it off, unfortunately, to our dismay. But if we, going back to what we've been saying, if we come to the United States, okay, some of you may disagree, maybe I'm naive, but members of the House and Senate that know very little about our plight, or they have been misinformed by people that are within our own groups that have come and misinformed them, they're not against the Assyrians. They're not. We just have to show them why they should be with us. Because think about this. The United States of America, we walked into Congressman Fort Mayor's office. Do you know how many other nations with other needs have come and have pleaded with these people? How many have come after us, and how many will come tomorrow? So why should they help us? We have to come up with a new narrative why they should help us. Why are we indispensable? Again, there might be disagreement with this, but I really don't think genuinely, at least most people that we encounter in Washington, they're not maliciously against the Assyrians. Absolutely there is Kurdish agenda. Absolutely there is. But I think if we take time and educate the Americans, I think we can win them over. On moral levels, on preserving us as a nation, especially liberals, they love that stuff. If we quit talking about us as Christians and we talk about us as an ethnicity that is on the verge of extinction, I think the left will become a little bit more excited about what we're trying to do.
Let me add to that. I also don't want to be certainly misunderstood. Assyrians have the right to exist in their land. The Kurdish people certainly, exist in large numbers in Iraq. They have for hundreds of years. We don't begrudge the existence of the Kurdistan regional government. It exists. There are borders for it. We recognize the current borders of the Kurdish regional government. What we are asking for is that the disputed territory that we believe is not historically Kurdish land, that their claim that it is Kurdish land not be honored, so that essentially the political jurisdiction of the Nineveh Plain be separate from the Kurdistan regional government, yet part of Iraq and part of Iraq as a separate province. So, all people have the right to exist and manage their affairs. The Kurdish regional government has the right to exist and manage their affairs. That said, to the extent that Assyrians have historically lived in the lands of northern Iraq for millennia, and we've had villages in northern Iraq for millennia, the other thing that we ask for is that to the extent that the Kurdish regional government continue to move forward, that it move forward as a democratically oriented entity that recognizes the rights of minorities that live within its jurisdiction, and we want to see our political rights guaranteed within the Kurdish regional government's constitution. And that said, we still want the area of the Nineveh Plain to be separate from the Kurdistan regional government.
I just want to make a point beside a question about why the Assyrians are indispensable in the Middle East, Iraq, and Syria. It's picture a Middle East without people that have any respect for value and believe with the people that are glorious, they're the fanatics. And you leave the Middle East with all those without having some kind of life. That's what bringing value to the Middle East as indispensable.
You're right. Yeah, because without Christians, it could be a breeding ground, or it is a breeding ground for fundamentalism. You're looking at your watch?
Yes,
we have to go?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? If you do, yes.
I have one question.
Yes.
The region that we're choosing is supposed to be systematically in our benefit in terms of population and demographics. But it exists. I'm sorry. The region that we're going to try and get a province for it's the best option for our people to have a demographic benefit in a democratic system. What systems are in place to prevent the other regions from altering the demographics through nonviolent
To
means?
alter our demographics?
Yeah.
How can we stop that?
Through immigration.
If we believe that well, thank you for bringing that up, and that's, remember I said I lost my point. That was the point I was going to make, that it was Saddam Hussein who brought and placed forcefully the Kurds in our Assyrian villages, and they're claiming them to be theirs now. I think, however, because we're calling for a democratic, multi-ethnic region, and I think that appeals to the West, we cannot build a wall. We cannot close a door on migration, right, into. But there has to be adequate governance that has been placed, that is sophisticated, where we will not be taken over once again. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
And there's a lot of work that needs to go in there in designing this governance system, but we've learned from the past. And unless we, I think just philosophically, those who don't learn from their past, they tend to repeat their mistakes in the future. Yes.
Brief comment, because I gotta go. I just want to say it's amazing that you all drove out from Chicago, a lot of you came to come here and talk with members of Congress and their staff. It's really, really important. We were discussing, part of the reason why the Kurds have been sort of successful in talking with the U.S. government. They have really a full-time presence here. They're using lobbying. They have a lot of money and that kind of thing. But having young people come out, people who are passionate about the cause, and really educating staff, that's where all this starts. So I encourage you to keep doing that. Keep coming out here when you can. Write letters to your reps and everything. Those really do make a difference. And definitely, as you decide sort of what careers to go into, or what you're doing with your lives, make sure that you consider coming out here and having sort of a full-time presence so you can really have influence for Syria.
Thank you. And Kelsey is the reason why we're in this room. She works on the Senate side on the Budget Committee. She has been instrumental, thank you Kelsey, to book us today, this afternoon, with Speaker Ryan's staff members. And
I work with Juliana too.
And she works with me. She's my social media guru. So anything you see on ICRC's page, it's all Kelsey's doing. So thank you so much. So Kelsey's a friend of our nation, truly. And Peter is a friend of our nation. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Robert is as well. So this is what we need. God willing, next time we come here and we do this, we're going to have a full room of non-Assyrians where we Assyrians have to stand. Truly, that's what our vision is. So thank you and God bless you. I guess the work continues, right? Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.